All right, we're right at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, so we're going to go ahead and get started. First off, again, good afternoon. I'm Tiffany, and I'm a membership director here at American Makes, and I'll also be your host for today's TRX webinar. So a little background on the series before I introduce our speaker. We created this platform about a year ago, and we named it the American Makes Technical Review and Exchange Webinar Series. And we did this so that we could continue to convene the manufacturing community on a monthly basis. And by doing this, we're also supporting the American Makes mission to expand and accelerate the footprint of additive manufacturing inside of the United States. So a few important notes before we kick things off. At the end of the presentation, there will be a brief Q&A session, but please also feel encouraged to ask questions throughout the presentation. If you would like to ask a question, just simply type it into the Q&A box located at the lower right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. So moving right along, today's TRX webinar will be presented by Dr. Cora Liebig. She has 20 years of experience within product development in the chemical industry. Prior to founding Chromatic 3D Materials, she was the Vice President of R&D and the Chief Operating Officer at Gaskets, which was a clean tech startup that developed and commercialized a bio-based chemical platform technology. Dr. Liebig obtained her bachelor's and master's degree in chemical engineering from MIT, and then she went on to complete her PhD in chemical engineering at the University of California in Santa Barbara. During her presentation today, Dr. Liebig will be discussing how Chromatic 3D Materials is commercializing a groundbreaking 3D printing capability that offers durable, robust thermoset plastics using the 3D printing process termed Reactive Liquid Additive Manufacturing. Previously, 3D printing similar to this was only available through expensive and time-consuming molding processes. This presentation will also provide an overview of the Reactive Liquid Additive Manufacturing process technology, the material advantages, as well as a representative commercial projects and the Chromatic 3D Materials path forward. So with that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Dr. Liebig.
Thank you, Tiffany. And thank you to the audience members for attending today's webinar. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about what we're doing at Chromatic. Just a little bit more about my background. I spent 12 years at Dow Chemical and also 8 years at Gaskets, and this experience has given me a lot of exposure to innovative new material technologies, how they're used in the industrial marketplace, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the founding of Chromatic and how we've endeavored to apply some of the knowledge of the materials industry to 3D printing with our efforts at Chromatic. So Chromatic 3D Materials, our mission is really to become a solutions-driven provider of industrial materials for additive manufacturing. We'll talk a little bit about what solutions-driven really means, but what at the core, what it comes down to is really being focused on what customers are trying to achieve by implementing 3D printing and making sure that they have the materials and the processes that it takes to make the parts that they're striving to make in their business. Chromatic was founded in February 2016. We closed our Series A investment just this year with DSM, which is a $10 billion materials company based out of the Netherlands, and other private investors. And with this investment round, it was able to add to our industrial expertise around the table and taking our direction forward. We do not make printers, but we have partnerships with a range of printer suppliers, and we're based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And just to give you a little teaser, some of the things that we can do, on the right you see a photo of some flip-flops that we wore at Formnext just a month ago. So these flip-flops were printed with our materials. They are flexible, they're durable. I wore them throughout the conference, and they really have the durability necessary for robust industrial applications, and as well as applications like footwear where there's really a demanding mechanical stress that's put on the materials. So what we're setting out to try to address is what we can call yesterday's 3D printing. And for a variety of reasons, 3D printing has, over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of brittle materials and a lot of broken parts. And when you look at this from a material science standpoint, there are a couple of reasons for it. One is that the printers themselves are very limited in the number of materials that they can handle. And so you have sort of a very limited material set with limited materials properties. But also, the manner of printing leads to parts that are more inclined to break because many printing processes, not all of them, end up leaving voids and gaps in the materials. And these themselves can lead to very brittle, broken parts that impact durability. And so we really wanted to look at this question of how do we make parts that can stand up to the kinds of industrial requirements for standard applications that demand durable materials and durable parts. So for the older people in the audience, you'll recognize this famous career advice where in the movie The Graduate, Dustin Hoffman is told that he should pursue a career in plastics. And I think this speaks to a lot of things. First of all, the fact that the plastics industry has a lot of learnings that we can benefit from in the 3D printing industry. It's been around for almost a century now. And really, I followed this advice of following a career in plastics, and it's given me a perspective on why certain materials are chosen for certain applications. And after looking at the 3D printing industry, my conclusion was that this is an industry that really needed a class of materials called thermosets. So the title of the seminar today is about a new class of durable materials. It's a new class to 3D printing, but it's an old class for the materials industry. And that class is thermosets. So what are thermosets? If you look at any given plastic material that is made, more than 20% of the materials that you see are made of thermosets. It's about a $160 billion market. This is in the plastics material sales world. And they're generally selected because they're some of the most durable and most flexible and most heat-resistant materials. And I'll get into a little bit of the reasons for why that is. But where you find them are in footwear, for one. You find them in foams, in your beds, your mattresses, your seating in your car. You find them on boats. You find them in medical devices, and you find them in electronics. All of these places demand the heat resistance, the durability that a thermoset can offer. And they represent a real broad range of properties as well. So what are some of the differences, and how are we defining thermosets today? So plastics melt. The melt flow sets the processing. So you start with a pellet, and you might form a filament, and the filament has a certain property that about when it melts and has a certain viscosity, and that really sets its processing from the get-go. But thermosets actually have a much broader range of properties. And what typically sets the processing rate is the cure rate. So there's chemistry that happens. And a typical place where you might see a thermoset is this example on the right, where we have a cartridge dispenser of superglue, where you have two components that are fed through a mixing nozzle, and that action of mixing causes them to react. And what the designers of these materials need to take into account is how fast is that reaction going to happen, and that typically sets the processing parameters. Now, photochemistry is a subset of thermosets where light brings that reaction along. But in our case, we're largely focused on materials where just simply the act of mixing, sometimes with added temperature, will make that reaction occur. So let's look a little bit more at how how thermosets fit into the traditional plastics market. And the reason why this is important to understand from a 3D printing perspective is that as we are trying to bring 3D printing into the industrial market space, our goal should be to understand what are the materials that our customers are using and how can we offer them the same kinds of materials, the same kinds of options that they use on a daily basis. So if you look at the plastics market overall, like I mentioned, thermosets in the gray here can be durable, they're flexible, they can be rigid, they're about 21% of the market. Olefins are typically more disposable and comprise about 66% of the market. But they also bring a lot of toughness and a lot of very good properties. And then engineering plastics over here on the left comprises rigid materials and materials like nylon, ultem, acrylics, and TPU. Now, if you look at today's 3D printing plastics and what we're using in this palette of materials that our customers are used to, really 3D printing plastics have barely scratched the surface of the material versatility that our customers are accustomed to. And until this pie is filled out with the materials, with 3D printing, we won't be able to offer our customers the same properties that they expect. Now, what governs our customers' material selection are balance of properties, there's process, there's the shape that they're trying to achieve, and then also cost. And cost is always a very important component of material selection. But what's important to understand is that for their applications, for our customers' applications, they are choosing each of these materials for very particular attributes. And so it's not very simple to go in and replace a PVC with a nylon or a TPU. You need to take into account why the customers are using the materials they are. And so we are simply working on this thermoset material set and looking at how we can deliver this to the industrial market space. Now, we will focus today on flexible, durable materials. Certainly, thermosets are not confined to flexibles. They can definitely go rigid. But let's take a step back and look at what it takes to make a flexible material. So I've drawn a cartoon here on the right to show on the molecular scale, a molecular cartoon, what a flexible material looks like. So first of all, they have a rubbery matrix. That's represented by these gray lines. These are long molecules that are stringing from one junction point to the next, but they have to be very flexible at the temperature where you want the flexibility. The other attribute is that you want to have some level of elasticity. In other words, if you have a flexible material, you need to be able to bend it and have it come back without a lot of creep. And in order to do that, you bring network connectivity. So you need to have some way to kind of bolt those flexible chains down. And that's represented by these blue circles. And then finally, we want durability. And durability is brought about by how strong those blue circles are. And that depends on junction size. It depends on the strength of the materials that make up the hard segments and mobility of those hard segments. So if we look at the library of flexible materials, we can see that with a variety of different hard segments or these junction points, you can access a wide range of tensile strength. So this is just looking at a library of materials with a Shore-A flexibility of 40 to 60. So in this 40 to 60 range, you might find PVC or olefin thermoplastic elastomers. In those cases, the junction that gives the material elasticity and strength is a crystal. It's a polymeric crystal. And there, the tensile strength tends to be between 1,000 and 2,000 psi. If you have a chemical bond, where here in these blue circles, you simply have chemical bonding linking these gray pieces together, that's like what you find with silicones or natural rubber. In that case, the tensile strength can range from 1,000 to 3,000 psi. If you have a glassy phase, like a styrene butadiene rubber or styrene isoprene, in that case, these blue dots are made up of a glassy material, like styrene. And there, the tensile strength is 1,000 to 2,000. But in a polyurethane, the reason why a polyurethane or a TPU can stand out is because in those cases, these junction points are hydrogen bonded, and that brings a large degree of strength to the junctions. So in that case, you get a bump above the other classes of materials in tensile strength. You can get 3,000 to 6,000 psi in terms of tensile strength. So that's generally how one goes about designing a flexible, durable material. To get durability, you look for how strong and how durable can you make these junction points. So in polyurethanes, they're basically built by having a collection of isocyanates and alcohols that are combined and cured with a little bit of catalyst, and what is formed are these polyurethane networks. And you have strong hydrogen bonding wherever one of these isocyanates reacts with a shorter alcohol. And so that's how you design the materials. And an important thing with polyurethanes is that you'll never find a really clear property for polyurethane because they are so versatile. So you can change these isocyanates. You can change their reactivity. You can change, how UV stable they are. You can change these alcohols to be more or less flexible, to be more or less susceptible to hydrolysis. And you can change how fast all of these components react with each other. You can also change molecular weights of these respective species. So this is why polyurethanes and thermosets generally allow you to access just a broad range of materials. So what we're doing at Chromatic is a novel technology that's also that's really just a modification of FDM. So what we have is a mixing print head. So if you look at this printer here, this happens to be a high-rel printer. You have one of those two-component cartridges like we showed for the super glue. So a two-component cartridge that holds liquid, and I think that's an important element here. It holds liquid, not a filament. So you have liquid components that feed through a mixing print head, and right here we have a static mixer that's about 2 inches long. And in that static mixer, as the two components flow through it, they start to react. So we have those liquid feeds moving through. The reaction starts in this tip, but by the time it comes out, it's only partially reacted, and the reaction is finished in the part. So if you look at this part that's drawn here, we have a gel on the top that's partially reacted, while all the way at the bottom, it's more completely reacted. And this brings a lot of very important attributes to 3D printing. The first most important element is that the parts are chemically bonded throughout. It's like we're printing with a Gorilla Glue, because as we're laying down each layer, it is chemically bonding to the layer below. Furthermore, the material, because it's not completely reacted when it comes out, it's able to react with the material side by side, and it can also flow slightly in order to fill all of the voids that could be formed in a standard FDM process. So the result is that we're able to make printed parts that have properties that are comparable to those conventional thermosets. Now here I have a video of printing on a German RepRap printer, so you can see a little bit more of this printing action. So here we have material coming through the print head, and it's being deposited in a lattice design. And the kinds of things that we can vary with this is we can vary how viscous the material is, how much of a gel it is when it comes out. We can vary how much it's able to react and flow with the materials around it as it comes down to the printing substrate. So, so what is special about what we do? Well, if you were to take a standard polyurethane elastomer and place it in these in these same pieces of equipment, you'll get just a blob. But yet, if we print with our materials, what we do is we really customize the viscosity and the cure rate and the chemistry so that we get a very solid part as it's printing. So we can get well-formed definition that you expect from 3D printing. And just a little bit more about how we control that printability, it's really not that different from what you see with a filament. So if you think about the filament, you can take a filament and the viscosity when it melts, and pardon me, but my mouse is a little slow here. When the material melts in a filament, the viscosity drops. You have a printing processing window of viscosity where that printing is happening. And then as it cools, it hardens to form the shape. This is basically what's happening in FDM. And we know that we can adjust the performance of that printing of the resin by adjusting the temperature at which the print head is at, and we can also adjust the temperature of the print bed. And this combination of dials allows us to alter the performance and quality of our print. Well, with reactive liquid additive manufacturing, we have some different dials, but they affect the same thing. So a thermoset, if you look at what happens to a thermoset, it starts as a liquid, so it actually starts at a low viscosity. And then as the reaction occurs, the viscosity climbs. So this is what we seek to manipulate in order to get the quality of 3D print that we have come to expect of FDM. Now what we do is match the print head design. So if you think about the viscosity that you might have when the material enters the mixer, and then the viscosity at the point that it exits, where it's just starting its reaction, what we can adjust is the resin chemistry to change how fast that viscosity increases. We can also use temperature, we can use catalyst, and we can also change the size of that mixer volume. And then when it solidifies onto the part, we can also adjust its performance there with the temperature again, as well as the reactivity. And so what we specialize in at Chromatic 3D Materials is how to design that resin chemistry to match the print head design to get the ultimate performance that's required in the application. Now here, I'm going to show you some of the results that we can get with this. So this is a very simple 3-layer print. It's about a Shore A of 65, so it's pretty flexible, but it's also really strong. So we've been able to get that same effect, get the same properties that we expect of a polyurethane, where it's flexible, but you can just keep stretching it over and over again. And these materials, these rings will just return right back to their original dimensions after the stress. So we can stress it over and over again, and because we've got that great hydrogen bonding, because we've got great chemical bonds just holding that part together, it's a part that is strong. And unfortunately, you can't see Dan's face as he stretches these, but he's definitely grimacing and working pretty hard to try to break that piece, and it's a tall task. But it was, as you could see, it was a very thin, flexible piece with strength that was printed. Now, if you just zoom in a little bit more and look at the parts, you'll also see that if you just compare here on the left, FDM of PLA, you can still see the residual lines. This is an IR spectroscopy through a slice. So you can still see the layer boundaries. And as many people who are experienced with FDM will know, it's very difficult to print with FDM in a way that gets less than 5% porosity. Now, if you contrast that with the right, what we're able to achieve are no visible layer boundaries and 0% porosity. We've been able to measure the porosity of the parts. And the reason why this is important when it comes to durability is that voids, and those small voids that we leave behind if the materials don't form a solid part, are actually crack initiators. And so with FDM, even with the most durable resin, if we are leaving voids behind, if we have that porosity, we're making a part that is going to have a greater tendency to form cracks and be less durable. So what we're able to achieve with our printing technology is not only start with a strong material, but we get excellent interlayer bonding and we form 100% solid parts. Now, like we talked before, there's also a great deal of material versatility. And this brings another element of interesting traits that we can bring to bear in 3D printing. So we can adjust these alcohols and isocyanates and their length in order to vary properties like flexibility. And we can also use conventional low-cost industrial raw materials to do it. So we have the potential of having low-cost materials. But very importantly, with thermosets, unlike thermoplastics, you can blend two materials in order to achieve intermediate properties. This is very distinct from thermoplastics. If you blend PLA and polystyrene, you don't usually get a material with properties in between the two. If anything, they're usually much, much worse. With a thermoset, when you blend them, you actually get intermediate properties. So what this means is that in the print head, we can actually adjust the material that we are printing. And so we have won a National Science Foundation grant in order to develop what we call algorithmic materials. So you can get a spectrum of properties and really multi-material parts, also with the durability of the polyurethane. So just like when you go to the paint store and you're faced with 10,000 paint colors to choose from, and that's coming out of just a very simple system with a limited number of ingredients, we're going to be able to do that in the print head as well and really bring a variety of properties that can adjust on the fly as we print. And that could be color, that could be flexibility, it could be a number of different properties. And so some examples of what we've been able to do here, here we have a multi-material star, again, where it's got a soft exterior and a hard center, and it's fully bonded part so that you cannot ply the two pieces apart. We also have a demonstration of a single piece hinge. Here, the dark purple areas are a harder durometer than these pink areas that are softer durometer. What that means is that you're able to print a part that is more likely to flex right in the center here. And so when we start to do this, we can imagine part designs where we're able to reduce fasteners and get the flexibility exactly where you want it. This really can take 3D printing and industrial applications of 3D printing to a whole nother level, where we're really able to influence not only geometry design of our parts, but also material design of our parts and bring the strength exactly where you need it and the flexibility exactly where you need it. Taking this a little bit further, as I mentioned at the opening, thermosets and polyurethanes could be used to make foams. And so this is an example of where we've got a printed elastomer base with an embedded foam. So here's an example of what that can look like and what kind of design that can make. So we have a very flexible part, and the foam, if you could touch this part, the foam feels quite soft and comfortable, and yet when we pound on it, it's still very, very strong because that elastomeric network can provide support. So this is really just being able to integrate parts in a way that could only be done with some of the most complex injection molding technology we're able to bring to bear in 3D printing. Taking this a bit further, another element we can do is directly print onto parts. The reason why this becomes so important is because of two attributes. One is the adhesion of the reacting material allows it to adhere very strongly to metal substrates, to other plastic substrates, but also an important element is that the printing can happen at room temperature. So in this case, in this video, what you see here is printing onto an ABS printed part, but because the printing happens at room temperature, we're able to add this elastomeric gasket to the part without having to fear melting of the ABS. But this could also be on a metal part. And I believe that this, flexibility of the printing method allows you to really open up new designs. You don't need to worry about how to bring these parts into the printer. So just to summarize our capabilities, we can extend, the class of thermosets have talked mostly today about polyurethanes, but these same philosophies, these same design approaches can be used with silicones, epoxies, foams, and the liquid delivery just brings a lot of versatility to the table. It brings the ability to bring color, it brings the ability to integrate inorganic fillers. There's just a lot of technology that can be brought to bear to bring material versatility. And I think the material versatility is just a hugely important element for our customers, because our customers, the industrial users of 3D printing, are accustomed to being able to have a selection that is cost-effective, but also that meets the needs of their particular applications. So that, and the urethane chemistry, the thermoset chemistry allows you to bring that adaptability to whether it be for wear and tear under cold, or heat properties, or UV stability. Now we've talked about cost. I think an important element here is that these costs are scalable because we aren't reinventing materials. We're more tailoring their processing for 3D printing processes. We're able to leverage all of the industrial know-how about how to design these materials and use industrially available raw materials. We also have a broad range of printer options. So we've talked about the property customization, multi-material parts, and this very important element of being able to deposit onto substrates. So what are some of these printers that we're working with? Well, the list of printers that we are working with is growing steadily. We've mentioned the Hi-Rel printer, the German RepRap printer. Structure 3D also has a printer that can, where the print head is an adjustment on an Ultimaker machine. But also Collider has an interesting printer where you can SLA print a shell and inject a polyurethane. So we are partnering with these printer companies in order to provide the software and the materials to meet the manufacturer requirements, whatever they may be. Okay, I see this question about voids initiating the cracks. I think I'll address that towards the end, if you don't mind, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And so, these, by collaborating with these printer companies, we're able to find, we're able to tune our resins to match the capabilities of the printers, but also we're able to meet the needs of our customers, whether they need a smaller print, a higher detail print, or you know, whatever the needs that they may have for their application. So how are we going about building our business? Really, because we're a small company, we're looking for near-term opportunities. We see huge potential for what we can do with this technology, but we need to take the first steps first. So we're really looking for near-term opportunities where we can implement and get some success, get our materials out in the market as quickly as possible. We're trying to lever existing chemistry and the printing technologies and execute on those opportunities. And then we want to use these opportunities to also continue to build the material capabilities as we go. And then as we do that, we're able to expand the scope and the reach of how this technology can really affect the implementation of 3D printing in industrial settings. And so we're really focused on this delivery of practical solutions to the customer challenges that we face. And by having this very specific focus on what a particular customer is trying to achieve, we're able to find the right chemistry and the right printers to satisfy their needs. So just a couple of examples of where we've been able to implement this. We had one customer who was looking for a thermally responsive biocompatible resin. So first what we did was we were able to customize the resin for those needed properties. You can adjust the performance of urethane elastomer as well as many other thermosets in order to change their mechanical properties and their thermal response. So we customized that resin to meet those needs. We also looked at how we could package the material so that their customer could have a seamless printing effort with minimal waste. And in this case, it actually ended up being a cast resin where there were 3D printed molds. And so we made sure that our resin was mold friendly so it could release from the molds easily for ease of manufacturing. Finally, the customer required regulatory friendly materials, and regulation of chemistry is definitely not something to avoid in the early stages. And fortunately, in my experience with materials in the materials industry, we were able to find quickly some regulatory friendly materials that would have the labeling that the customer was looking for. And finally, we were able to arrive at a cost-effective solution for them. Another example, and again, this is for a cast resin, and I want to just point out that sometimes the best technology to approach is not necessarily direct printing, but can also, a direct printing technique like reactive liquid additive manufacturing, but sometimes it's a cast resin where they're using a 3D printed mold. We try to pay attention to when a customer would be better served by using a 3D printed mold. So in this case, they wanted a cast resin for for 3D printed mold printing with high durability. So again, we customized the resin to make sure that the resin met the properties that they needed. It needed compression strength in this particular case. We were able to formulate, so we were mold friendly, so they were able to get more cast per mold. Again, we used regulatory friendly materials so that the customer did not have to take extra precautions with using our materials, and arrived at a cost-effective solution. In another case, a customer is looking for direct printing on an existing part with personalized features. Now, in this case, they wanted to print on top of a part they already had. So this is more active in our portfolio right now. We're developing this as we speak. We're developing materials that have the right level of resiliency and flexibility that the customer is looking for. In this case, they wanted a little bit of a memory property to the elastomer. And because we're able to do direct printing onto a substrate, we're able to look at direct printing onto the shapes that they were looking for. Now, there are a lot of technologies out there. We've talked again today mostly about flexible parts, so continuing along the lines of what are some of the choices in flexible materials. There are cases, frankly, where Stratasys Object or PolyJet or carbon are the better choices. But the cases where we believe Chromatic is really a good solution for a customer to look at, first of all, is flexibility with durability. Carbon resins tend to, the shore hardness is about a shore A of 70 and above, and then they move to silicones. In our case, we're able to move to urethane solutions all the way down to a shore 30. Stratasys object printers, PolyJet printers, these also really struggle with some of the durability requirements that are necessary for these flexible materials. When it comes to depositing directly in a substrate, we believe reactive liquid additive manufacturing is really the right choice to go, the right choice to use, because you can print directly on just a whole range of materials without a very sensitive printing environment. We also discussed the material versatility, and this is just so essential in so many applications that we're able to adjust the raw materials and make them printable no matter what, for just a broad range of versatility that these customers are accustomed to. Large parts, because of this printing approach, we are not limited by a print bed size. You are limited by how far, by the displacement of your print head. But for the most part, we're able to leverage the technologies that are out there for doing large part FDM printing. A capability we haven't talked a lot about, but we're also very excited about, is the ability to print foams. This allows you to get very durable but low density materials to bring cushioning and comfort in a lot of different applications. And then finally, overall costs, because we're using scalable raw materials, we really believe that ultimately for cost-sensitive applications, if the applications are large enough, we're going to be able to have some competitive costs. And then this just sums up what this flexibility range means. We've talked a lot about shoe soles. Sort of the shore 40 to shore 60 range is what you typically find for gaskets, shoe soles, tire treads, golf balls, inner tubes. And this is where we're focused today, is in this flexible range. But as I said, this kind of technology can easily extend to more rigid materials, and we welcome opportunities to explore there. But today, we're really focused on this flexible range. So some applications that you can consider for this technology are rubber parts. We are especially seeing a lot of interest in the area of making spare parts, as well as being able to direct print gaskets onto parts. And there's a lot for spare parts and for remote repair, these are a fairly low-cost way to be able to bring production to the site, whether it be a military site or a remote oil and gas platform. There's also, as we talked about, foam. Soft and rigid foam parts are everywhere. You find them in mattresses, cushioning, vibration dampening, insulation, and we really see all of, flexibility is so important wherever you have human contact, and that's exactly where we want personalization. And this takes us into footwear, the driving experience in automotive and in the cabin, as well as in packaging, where you want particular packaging for specific objects. So we really are excited about where this can go in the future. We've got a great team, but it's a small one. Today we have 6 people, including myself, but we really strive to choose industry veterans, people who have done a lot in the field of material development, robotics development, and combined we have more than 135 years of startup and relevant industry experience. And so hopefully this will mean that we're making good choices as we move forward. So finally, when should you pick up the phone and give us a call? If you're looking for production-ready durable materials, if you're looking for customized properties for a part or within a part, if you're looking for being able to add to a part, or if you're looking for multi-material solutions, we really invite you to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to take a look at whether our technology can meet your needs. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And I think I'll probably start on the void initiating cracks question, unless, Tiffany, you had any other things you wanted me to pick up right away.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you. That was great. I'm really glad that you were able to do this presentation today. We did have 2 questions come through during the presentation, so if you want to start with the one you saw, we can go there, and then I'll give you the other one.
Great. So the question was about voids initiating the cracks in FDM printing. I don't have them handy right now, but there's a lot of literature to point to this. So I'd be happy to give you a couple of references there. But in general, when you look at crack formation and the science of crack formation, what a material does is it looks for stress concentrators. And voids basically serve to be a great point for stress to concentrate and initiate cracks. And that's really where failure happens. And if you look at the length scale where voids can initiate cracks, this length scale in the 50 to 100 microns, which is typical for voids in FDM, is exactly the recipe for crack initiation in plastics. So, so there's a lot of science in terms of durability and fatigue in plastics that point to this problem of voids, but also directly pertaining to 3D printing, you'll find a lot of literature showing how density can translate to void formation and cracks.
Okay, thank you. The other one that came through says, how long does it take polyurethane layer to cure before it can be printed on top of?
Okay. This is something that we can actually tailor. We typically design our parts so that you can lay something on top of it within about 20 seconds. So it's, for a large part, that's usually not a problem at all. But this is also something that we have a lot of capability to adjust. So while today we're typically at 20 seconds, we can go shorter for sure. But it does take some adjustment of the resin. We prefer to keep it a little more like the 20-second range just because it makes the printing a little more robust. Because as you drive towards shorter and shorter times, you might be more running the risk of clogging in the print head. But I believe that as the technique improves and develops, we'll be able to control that a lot better and really make sure that you can even go to much lower than 20 seconds.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, I see this question about ventilation needs for printing with 2-part materials. It really depends on the resin. We've been trying to stick to resins that do not require ventilation for safe handling. But there are some resins that do require it, and sometimes we have customers who might request materials that would require some ventilation. And in that case, you need to ventilate the printing environment. But really, if you're keeping the materials with, once the material is cured up on the bed, and that really only takes a few minutes, it should not require any additional ventilation.
Okay, perfect. And would you mind spending just a moment or two to tell the audience how these materials compare to harder plastics?
Sure. So we've been focusing on the flexible range not because of a limitation of the materials, but because it's, we believe, a huge opportunity for 3D printing and a gap that needed to be filled. To go to harder materials, there are obviously some places where people would rather use an ABS or over a urethane, but typically in our everyday life, you see urethanes in rigid parts all over the place. Usually they have a temperature window, a use window that goes from very, very low temperatures like minus 50 C, so you'll find it for cold weather applications, all the way up to about 150 C. So you might not use it under a hood of the car, but it has pluses and minuses relative to other rigid materials, but you can certainly get quite rigid with the polyurethane. You don't usually find it going head-to-head with a polycarbonate, which is quite a bit harder, but it can extend to quite rigid materials. Certainly competitive with sort of a polystyrene type rigidity.
Okay, thank you for that. And then if you wouldn't mind just touching on what about the surface finishing techniques and the resolution with your materials?
Sure. So today we've been, when you look at those flip-flops that I showed, that's printed with a about a 0.2 millimeter nozzle. And I think one of the surprising attributes is that some of the surfaces are very glassy and shiny, even though it's printed with a relatively low resolution. Now, you can certainly go to higher resolution, and there are printers on the market that can do 2-component printing that go to as low as 20 microns at the nozzle tip. But what we're finding is that because there's just a little bit of flow as the material is being deposited, you get a very nice shiny surface, and the shine is an indication that it's not rough, and it's quite a smooth finish. So what we're really excited about is that this can mean that you can print with a great surface finish at very low resolutions and therefore at higher speeds. I think another attribute of the urethanes is that they are paintable. Paint adheres very well to urethanes, as well as the embedded color like we demonstrated. And then another really nice attribute of urethanes in particular, and a lot of thermosets, is that they are millable. And so you can certainly imagine a case where you can print, say, a multi-material part and then finish off with milling and get a very, surface finish that's quite common in the milling area, where you can get to very high resolution and definition.
Thank you for that. And then we did have, okay, go ahead. You see it?
I see this question about upper speed limit of printing with chromatic materials. This is something that we're still working on understanding exactly what are the limits. Because of the printing methods, they print. You can fill a part very, very easily. And so what we find is that a highly detailed part, where it's a lattice structure, for example, is a slow print. You can be looking at, you're really limited by the translation speed of the printer. Now, we're more limited by the translation speed than the actual materials themselves. So as printers are able to translate faster and faster, we're going to be able to keep up with that. So, so a lattice structure, as you saw in that video, one layer was going to take quite a bit of time. So that lattice structure could take about 45 minutes, where it's sort of 8 inches by 2 inches and a number of layers high. But what's a very interesting component of the polyurethanes with our materials is that you can change the speed that it's moving through the print head when you're filling. And so if you just have a high definition edge, but then you want to fill the material quickly, you can go very fast and exceedingly fast, much faster than standard FDM printing. So I guess I would take as a benchmark FDM printing, and then for solid parts, it's going to be a lot faster. I would say a factor of 2 faster at least, and we're still working on our benchmarks there. But for higher detailed printing, it's going to be a lot more like your typical FDM. But it's much more limited by the translation speed of the printers than the chemistry itself.
Okay, thank you for that. And I have one more question here, but for those folks still on the line, I encourage you to send any questions that you may have into that Q&A box before we wrap things up today. So my last question for you would be, where do you believe your technology will first be put into the commercial use?
So first of all, I think the most immediate demand is, again, because we're trying to focus as a solutions provider, urethanes are used as cast into 3D printed molds all the time today. So we are really starting our product offering for cast materials. As we move into the direct printing, the reactive liquid additive manufacturing, we're seeing the first applications are probably in the footwear as well as automotive spare parts. That's where we're seeing a lot of interest, and then we're also really excited to see where the foam technology can take us. I think we'll be looking at having foams on the market really in the next 18 months.
That's great. I look forward to seeing where this goes. We'll give it just another minute. I'll wait here and just see if anybody sends any last-minute questions.
Well, I really appreciate everyone's interest and look forward to our participation in America Makes moving forward for sure.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Dr. Liebig, and the Chromatic 3D Materials team and the audience also for your participation today. I really enjoyed listening to this, and in a few days here we'll have the recording out on our America Makes YouTube page so we can share that amongst the audience today, and then they could share it with their colleagues as well.
Super. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I don't see any other questions coming through, so with that, we'll go ahead and conclude today's TRX webinar. Okay, thank you.